Races. All of those Shiver Werewolf books. She's extraordinary. She's here. We really want to thank our literary arts boosters who sponsored this visit. I think everybody who's run across her today has had a really great time. I do want to tell you, I'm not making it up. If you would like to get a book signed, she will be signing books right after she's finished here, right on the stage. So if you realize you've made a mistake and you don't have a book to get signed, you can still run downstairs, get that book, and come back up. Got it? Are you ready? All right, let's give Maggie Stiefvater a really big round of applause.
I want you to imagine the scene. In one hand, I am holding a chicken. I'm looking very intently at the chicken. I should also mention it's night. It's pitch black. It's very cold. It's one of those nights that's so cold that you can feel your breath coming out of you, and then you can see your breath in the air. Every single star and the chicken. In one hand, I have the chicken, and in the other hand, I have my steering wheel. My eyes are on the road because it's important to have eyes up to get to where you intend to go. This is a good lesson in life as well as in driving. But I am also looking at the chicken occasionally. Eyes on the road, chicken, steering wheel, chicken. The chicken is dead. It's been dead for a while. One of the interesting things about the English language is that fresh chicken and dead bird are the same thing, so this thing in my hand was both at the same time. I was here with this chicken corpse, and I was looking carefully at it as I was driving. I was, at the time, going 80 miles an hour. The scene is this. I am at the Princeton Speedway, and I am racing world-famous author John Green in my personal car. I like this car very much. If you're a car person, you'll know what it is. It was a 2012 Mitsubishi Evo with a totally built engine. If you don't know cars, it was one of those little yellow ones with a big handle on the back that looks like you should be driving it around inside a bathtub, and I'm way too old to be driving it. So I'm in this car. John Green is in a race car because when you're John Green, do we know who John Green is? Are we satisfied? You might know him as a vlog brother, or also he wrote the Cancer Kid movie, Fault in Our Stars. So he is in a race car, a proper race car for the dirt oval, because when you're John Green, people will loan you race cars. So this entire thing began many months before when I was on Twitter, and John Green, who I didn't know any more than that at this point, tweeted me just one sentence, and it was this. Want a race? Yes. The answer is yes. The answer is always yes. He said, would you like to race? I challenge you in whichever of your vehicles is fastest at this moment. Which is how I found myself months later on a dirt oval, Princeton Speedway, which had been shut down for a charity race in front of our friends, family, loved ones. People had flown in from it. I was late on the way there, which is the reason why I picked up dinner on the road so I could gnaw on this rotisserie chicken as I was driving. I want you to imagine the sleek figure I cut driving in this bright yellow car that has paint splattered down the side, and I'm shifting gently through traffic with a chicken leg in my hand as well. However, I had forgotten in the excitement of all of this and the press of time that this juicy dead bird that was in my car until I was actually in the race. It was very thrilling to get there and drive through all of the people who were waiting there and then find John Green standing there. John Green had never raced before. He looked a little nervous. If you know his online persona, he's a little anxious. He seemed anxious, especially when the people who were at the track said, John, you're going to have to wear a fire suit. We will loan you one. Maggie, I guess we can loan you one, but you're a little bit smaller than the guys who normally race on this track, which is when I said, hold on, what's this in my trunk? Oh, it's a black and white fire suit, my helmet, they're all embroidered with my name because I've done this before. John, on the other hand, had not done that before. Like I said, he looked quite anxious as he got into the fire suit. Little did he know that at least one of us would be on fire shortly. He climbs into this, and then he got into the car. If you're familiar with dirt cars, it was a proper one. You can't open the doors. You have to go in and out through the window, which is not difficult or a problem unless, of course, you have to leave the car quickly, like if it's on fire. So John is installed in there. He looks very nervous. I can't see much of his face because he's got the helmet on, and then the glasses are fogged up, but his mouth is sad. And when I walked over there to give him an inspiring word of advice, he looked up at me and he said, "I hate you." I took that to mean he was excited. So out we went immediately, and like I said, I had forgotten that I had this rotisserie chicken, which I had selected for its juiciness. So here I am, driving sideways in this car, in the dirt. Car is revving up hugely. There is something wrong with it. It does actually shut off every single time it gets below a certain RPM, but no worries, I just started again as I am driving. But I have cloth seats, hence my eyes on the chicken, my eyes on the road as I'm driving. So here I am driving along, chicken, don't spill, 80 miles an hour. John is very slow. Later we find out this is because he uses his foot on both the gas and the brake at the same time, which impedes the forward movement of the car. I lapped him several times, come around, and I realize John is on fire. My first thought is, should I stop? My second thought is, how dramatic. Way to escalate, John. You're going to burn to death in front of your fans? So I came to a stop. They were already delivering him from the car like he was a burning cow coming out of a delivered cat, or a calf coming out of a cow. And he lays there on the ground for a minute as they kind of pat him out. He jumps up and he says, "I'm all right." And then he gets back into the car. We go again. We've made it 3 or 4 rounds about. Come around the corner and he's on fire again. My phone is buzzing. My husband is texting, watching the race go down on Twitter. "Stop setting John on fire." I'm like, "It's not me, it's not me." Later, they pull him out of the car. They take him away from the car. They have me race everyone there. It's a great night. I go home to the Airbnb. I make a series of probably ill-advised tweets saying things to John like, "Now you're the hottest author in YA," and "Your career's on fire," not realizing that the soft sound that I'm hearing is my karma bank slowly emptying until I am driving home from Minnesota to Virginia, stopping only once, no, twice, once in Wisconsin to make cookie dough at a rest stop with stuff that I had bought from the grocery store so that I could eat it for the next 9 states, and once to be pulled over by the police in Indiana, who walked alongside my car, which was covered in dirt, looked at me, looked at the car, looked at the bowl of cookie dough, and said, "You seem like a cool lady. You should go." Everything was going well until, in Ohio, my car caught on fire. However, I would do it all again. I tell you this story because what I'm actually going to talk about to you guys is what I do for a living. And the reason why I'm talking to you about this is because even though I know I talked to the small group of you guys earlier about this, I'm never exactly sure how to answer this question when people say, "What do you do for a living?" And it's a thing that adults get asked all the time, either in conversation, "Oh, hey, what do you do for a living?" Or in those depersonalized forms that say occupation, "What am I supposed to put in the little box there?" Somehow, when I look at the fullness of my career, simply writing, writer there, feels kind of untrue. Feels like a thing that I use in my job, but not truly my job. For instance, here are some things that I have done over the past couple of years to pay my rent. 1, writing, obviously. I'm best known for writing novels, fiction, long form, and I love doing it. I don't spend most of my day writing my novels, however, though. I know a lot of people set up their timing with writing a word count for every day or every week, or they set up a time limit. Generally, what I do, because a novel is an enormous project, is that right at the beginning of my deadline, I get to work. Every other day, I set up a very strict thing for myself where I work on a chapter every single day. I start in the morning, and if I get the chapter done in an hour, well, I'm free. If I get the chapter done in 16 hours, well, it was a 16-hour workday. I do this religiously for months upon end until I have a massive manuscript, and then 1 month from my deadline, I have a massive personal crisis, and I throw out everything that I've written, and I write it again in a month. That's one of the things that I do. 2, I do art. Yeah, my publishers often ask me to do exclusive covers for special editions. A 10th anniversary edition of the Scorpio Races just came out with my art in the cover. Or I'll work on book plates that go to my independent bookstore that I work with, and I enjoy doing that. Before I was a full-time author, I was a full-time portrait artist, which was a very hard job to make a living at. I used to work 60 or 70 hours a week, and I actually did enjoy the game of it. There's nothing really wrong with portrait art as a living, except for eventually you get tired that every single piece of art that you have to do has to have your client in it, which is generally what portrait art is. I did this with some happiness until I finally was broken by my final commission, the commission of The Ugly Baby, a story too long to tell you now. However, I still do quite a bit of art, and I enjoy doing this. When I was young, and I started wanting to write when I was very tiny, I thought that I would actually have to get rid of 2 sides of myself, because I thought that there was no one who was a writer and an artist and a musician, or at least I had never met anyone that did all of those things. So I think my childhood self would be glad to know that not only do I do writing and art, but a third thing I do to pay my rent is that I also do a lot of music. Every single year, at least, I head over to my studio that I built at my house, and I write and record a song that gets played at the front of my audiobooks. I just met Hannah, yes, has been reading the audiobook of The Raven Boys. The music at the front of that is mine, which I love the game of this, not only because I love studios. Studios are a place that are perfectly and amazingly silent, except for noise that you make yourself, and I think there's something magical about that. But I also love the fact that, like I said, I didn't think that I would get to do music as part of my life. I thought I would have to choose one thing. Back when I was in college, I had multiple bands. We toured up and down the eastern seaboard. I played the bagpipes competitively. I'm going to give you a moment to think about that, actually. Does anyone here play the bagpipes? Yeah, no hands ever go up. Yeah, so I played them competitively. I want you to imagine for a moment a bagpipe competition. You can kind of get there if you imagine a marching band competition, because we had to be in uniform, so imagine the kilts, right? That's all happening. Sporrans, furry socks, and you're judged on your marching, so we're all marching as we're playing, and it's the bagpipes, which are, again, inherently hilarious, and that was what I did every single weekend, bagpipe competitions. Yeah, I wonder what happened to the other ones in the competitions. Did they go on to be authors too? This might be fun to track them down. Yeah, so musicians. I was, like I said, it was great to be able to use music in my life as well. What else do I do? Freelance writing. So not just novels, but I also have written nonfiction for magazines like Road and Track and Jalopnik. Those are car magazines. And I've also ghostwritten for places like WikiHow, which means that you can also find Maggie Stiefvater writing not just on the shelves of Barnes & Noble, but also you can find articles of me trying out the latest Rolls Royce, or perhaps chronicling the crushing of the final Mitsubishi Evo, or reading such great articles as How to Exercise with Rheumatoid Arthritis, or possibly How to Attract a Capricorn Woman. These are all things that I have done to pay my rent. What else have I done? Oh, television, Hollywood. I have written scripts. I have pitched television shows. I have stood on the grounds of Disney and Warner Brothers with executives who have turned to each other and said, we should get Maggie in front of the studio. She's very saleable. I'm right here. So you know you're very saleable. Hollywood is a very strange place. my first film agent used to always call me Pookie. And I don't know if you're really getting a Pookie vibe. I didn't think I was giving off a Pookie vibe. But to be fair, he also renamed all of his assistants. They were named Eric. His name was Eric. So they would call and say, "Hello, this is Eric calling for Eric." And I would say, "What was your name before?" And they would say, "I can't say." Hollywood is a very strange place. Everything that you've ever seen about the television industry, no matter how stereotyped it seems, is true. We actually got very close to getting a Raven Cycle television show. They asked me if I would move out to LA to showrun and write for them. And I thought about it for a hot second, and then I thought, I feel like there are many cautionary tales about what happens to people like me if we move to LA. I feel like I'm at peak ridiculousness right now. I can't get any more ridiculous or something terrible will happen. So I said no. That is why there's no Raven Cycle television show. But it's still very time consuming. I do spend a lot of my time doing that. What else have I done in pursuit of my career? I planned a heist. For one of my novels, I needed to find out if you could steal Madame X from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So I did all of the research, I did all of the planning. I feel like I would have a very good mind for crime if I wasn't, legit. And I called my editor and said, we need to go and see if it all checks out. So he arrived, and we went through the Met. I don't know if you've been to the Met, but it's amazing. I've been there many times. So we went through all of the various steps that I had planned out for stealing this painting. By the end, we had a whole kind of retinue of security guards following us, and I'm pretty sure I'm on a list now, and I feel strongly that I could steal Madame X. Yeah, I do. I didn't. Anyway, in the end, I cut that chapter anyway, so the only thing I get out of it is the possibility that I could steal Madame X. What else do I do? Seminars. I also do a lot of teaching. I, during COVID, put on an 8-hour video seminar. I was very proud of myself because I hate doing videos. I do them again and again and again. So the 8-hour video seminar was actually 84 years of my life compressed into 8 hours. But I was very proud of myself for doing that. And then I also did a lot of in-person teaching back when I was pre-COVID. I think my favorite retreat that I ever did is one where the big message that we did, it was a week-long retreat, a whole bunch of aspiring writers. We were trying to teach them the value of the lesson of the disposability of ideas and the permanence of the creator. So you are not your ideas, and I feel like this is a very relevant thing to say to a room full of creators, which is a lot of times you can get precious about a single idea or a version of yourself, and then when it doesn't work, you can be crushed because it's part of you, it's an extension of you. And one of the things that's important if you want to be in a career as a writer is a certain durability that comes from constantly being able to abandon an idea or let go of the failure of an idea in order to start another one, to improve, to move on to greener fields. So we were trying to teach them all of this durability. So we began the entire retreat with a big presentation, quite like this, and we did a big, giant version of a Jenga game with long, custom-made cardboard boxes, and we had them all do their team-building thing, and then we gave them each one of these boxes. Coincidentally, there was one box for each of them. And for the rest of the week, we had them do all of their exercises on this box. Every single class, we had them come in and do an exercise on the box. If it was novel generation, they would write down their ideas on that. If we were talking about encountering our fears or our hopes, they would write all of that on there. We encouraged them to take them to meals with them. They drew on them. They became works of art, these boxes. They were as particular as the writers themselves. So they were starting to get really excited as they grew more confident as the week went on. They had more ideas than they'd ever had before. They had started writing stories. Some of them had written them on the boxes. Some of them had written them on their phones. Some had actual novel chapters. And on the very last day, we said, it is now time for your final lesson. We want you guys to all come down and meet us at the river and bring your boxes. Someone said, oh, as if this sound dreadful, dire. So they all came down to the river where we'd built a giant bonfire. It's one of my fondest memories. Some of them were already crying as they came halfway down the hill because already, even though we could have been down there just to have a nice time, they knew that they were not there to have just a nice time. They'd spent a week with me. So I said, you guys can have your phones. You can take pictures of the boxes. You don't have to worry about shipping them back with you now, anyway. So they're all weeping. And I said, remember, these boxes, it only took you a week to do them. In another week, you could have those boxes again. The whole process was the joy of making the box, and you have another box which is better in you. And then they all threw them on the fire one by one. And what's cool about this retreat is that now it's been enough years that those folks are now published and sending me their box books, which is a pretty neat thing. So this is the thing. I told you guys I was going to talk about what I do for a living. Is that writer? It just doesn't feel correct to say writer. Is it hustling? Is it performer? I feel like writing is the technique. It's a tool. It's one of the ways that I translate the abstract from the concrete. And I know you guys heard me say that upstairs, and I say it a lot. Upstairs, outside, somewhere over there. A different room than this. I have very bad object permanence. Yeah, the idea of translating the abstract to the concrete. Writing is just one tool that I have to do, but it's such a small part of my workday. Writer, musician, artist. A couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago, probably 5 years ago, more than that, some years ago, I was invited to give a TED Talk. It was very flattering. I felt like I was very young and new in my career to be giving a TED Talk, but was very flattered. It was put on by NASA, which I thought was a somewhat inappropriate mismatch for someone who at the time was most famous for a werewolf series. I asked them on the phone, I said, so NASA, what am I supposed to be talking about for this TED Talk? And they said, we don't care, just make it profound. Right, that's profundity is what I am known for. And then they said, bring your Camaro. And I said, how did you know I have a Camaro? And they said, we're NASA. So I wrote this talk, which was about how bad teens become famous people. And it was a fine talk. Was it profound? It was the best I could do at the time. So I get there, and it's amazing because it's a TED Talk put on by NASA. So all of the other great thinkers and speakers there are, well, they are not people who write werewolf novels. In fact, the presentation which is going on just before mine is a scientist who is in charge of directing the retirement of a satellite. They have decided because it is time to retire the satellite, they will turn it directly into the path of an oncoming comet. And as it explodes, it will send that data back in a live stream to everyone in the 1,200-strong audience to watch. So that is what they got to watch, the destruction of a satellite by comet in live time, and now Maggie Stiefvater. So here I am, giving this talk as the clock counts down, 11, 10:59, everything with NASA is a countdown. I give this talk, and actually, it turned out to be great, because afterwards, all of the speakers mingled together and we shared ideas and we came up with things that we wouldn't have normally come up with, which was the entire point of TED Talks at the beginning, which was for all of these thinkers to just be more broadly educated in interesting topics. So what's interesting about the TED Talk situation, though, is that we were headed back to the hotel on the NASA shuttle. It was the bus back to the hotel. All of the speakers, and sitting next to me was a speaker whose talk I had enjoyed hugely. He was a consultant for businesses, and his talk had been about the power of, if you couldn't solve a problem, skipping it. And he had said that he was often called in to businesses that had impossible problems, and he always came in, and the first thing he said is, tell me your problem. They would tell him his problem, and he'd say, how long have you been working on it? And they would tell him, and he would say, it's not the problem. And they would shout at him, and he would say, no, you're all very clever people. If that was actually the problem, it'd be fixed by now. So I'm here to find out what the real problem is. We're going to skip that problem and find the actual one, which I thought was great because it's very true. And I told him this, and he said, I really liked your talk too. And you know, I actually have been Googling you a little bit. I found out some things about you. So what I want to know, he said, is what do you think your superpower is? Since you do speaking and you do writing and music and art, what is your superpower? Now, I could tell that this was one of those wizard riddles, right? I mean, you have to take your time with it. So I thought about it very hard, what connected all of these things for me, and finally I said, Storytelling. And I felt very clever about saying it. And he said, wrong. Okay, stranger on a bus who I just met, what is my superpower? And he looked at me and he gave me a very smug smile and he said, changing people's moods. Fine, wizard. So I think both are true, actually, because it's true that I think that if I was going to identify my job, that is my job description. I think I am a storyteller. But I think what makes storytelling different from writing or just creating is that storytelling is any kind of art that isn't complete until it's consumed. It's designed to have an audience. Writing doesn't have to have an audience. You can write in a journal, you can write for yourself, you can write notes, but storytelling isn't complete until you get the reaction of the audience, which means getting better at storytelling instead of writing isn't just about improving your word-for-word craft. It's making sure that you're improving your word-for-word craft and your choices so that you are learning to better identify how to change the feelings of the people that you are actually writing for. And if I had one thing to tell you guys as a young storyteller, young writers, it's that the biggest thing that has changed in my writing from when I was young to when now is that I understand humans better because I now know my study of humans and what makes them feel is actually my job. Not learning how to write better. I could write the most perfunctory sentences ever, but if I didn't know how to actually change people's moods, I wouldn't be a big commercial novelist. I've learned to become a better storyteller by learning how to be a better human, being a better friend, listening to people, learning to empathize with not how other people act, but how other people feel, what makes them laugh or smile or sob or shake their fist at the sky and say, why, Maggie, Stiefvater, why? So storytelling across all media. For me, a book doesn't mean anything until it's in the reader's hands. The art doesn't mean anything unless it's telling people more about the book that they're going to find inside it or whatever my purpose was for the art. The music is to set up the tone for the audiobook. It's storytelling. I think that is my job, storytelling. So storytelling, I think, is interesting also because not everybody in this audience is a writer, right? And not everybody in this audience is going to go on to be a full-time writer or even wants to be a full-time writer. But everybody in this room will go on to be a storyteller because every single human is a storyteller. We tell stories by accident. We're actually incredibly good at it. Even if you talk about the concept of going to the grocery store and then having an altercation with a vehicle on the way there, another driver has cut you off or something, if you convey what you think are the bare facts to someone else, you're already telling a story because you've chosen the beginning and the end, and you've crafted your words and your structures to try and make your listener see it from your point of view, right? You as the protagonist, them as the antagonist. You have told a story, and you're doing it because you are trying to change the way they feel about it. We do it all the time, and knowing that our words have that kind of power makes us better at using them. So I'm interested in that kind of storytelling, the way we affect other people. But I think the thing I'm most interested in is how we can storytell, even if we are the only person in the room, because one of the most potent stories that we have is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. Now, those of you who got tarot readings from me in the library probably already know what I'm going to say about this, but we all have a vision of ourselves which may or may not be true. We take the data in front of us and we decide what this means about us. If we're a fearful person, a brave person, a proud person, whatever, we decide who we are. One of my favorite things is that there's a theory of personality that was designed in the 70s by a man named Daryl Bem, Daryl being the most 70s possible name I could possibly imagine. And his theory of personality says that our personalities are not innate. They are a series of decisions that we make every single day to be the people that we are. And I think this is just the coolest thing ever. His theory goes like this. So imagine you tell yourself that you are a naturally anxious person, a fearful person, unwilling to take risks. So he says that you say every day, that's who I am, and then you behave because you told yourself that. So imagine you as this fearful person were encouraged by your friends again and again to go skydiving. You said, no, I'm too afraid. I'm an anxious person. Eventually, they manage to convince you to do it. So these are the raw facts. You get into a plane, you jump out of it, you survive. At the bottom, you are still the same collection of atoms you were at the top, give or take. And you have choices, says this theory of personality. Your choice is to say, I am a fearful person. My friends pushed me onto this plane. I did it because I am a loyal person. I jumped out of this plane. I survived. Phew. I'm a fearful person, but I survived anyway. Or you could take that same collection of events and say instead, all right, I'm a fearful person. I was convinced to get onto this plane against my will. I jumped out. I survived. I must not be as fearful as I thought I was. And his theory of personality says that the difference between these two things is that if you say to yourself, I'm a person who survived, I'm fearful, the next step that you take will be similar to the one you took before in a fearful direction. But if you are a person who has reframed it based upon events and told yourself, these same things happened to me, I must not be as fearful as I thought, you revise your opinion of yourself based upon what you went through, the next step you take will be a braver one. I think that that is the coolest story that we can tell ourselves, which is being mindful of the story that we tell about ourselves. It doesn't have to be about correcting flaws either. Sometimes it is. I remember that when I was young, I was a very tiny, phobic, anxious child. I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and I was a creature ruled by these obsessions and compulsions and phobias. And not knowing any better, I would just do whatever they said. Thunderstorms said you had to do a certain thing. Cats, dogs, oceans, killer bees, all of these things were coming for me at all times, and so they controlled my every waking movement. I had a long series of things I had to do every single day in order to make it through the day. So I went through my life as this until I got to around 16, and I remember I had been reading a lot of novels and watching a lot of movies, and I'd been trying to decide what I wanted to be, and I wanted to be storyteller, novelist. I'd known since I was small. And I can't remember what triggered it, but I looked at myself and I realized, but you're never going to do those things, are you? Because you can't do those things if you have a long list of things that you have to do to get out of the house, if you have to go and hide someplace every time you hear thunder. And I thought, I'm not going to do it anymore. I am going to be someone who can do anything. That was the new story. Not once upon a time, there was a girl with OCD. Once upon a time, there was a girl who could do anything. And I said, I'm not going to be afraid of anything anymore. And of course, it didn't work like that. You can't turn off your fear like that, but it was a mission statement, right? Looking back, I realized that I was still running through life terrified, but I was instead choosing to believe I could do anything, which meant I barreled through obsessions and compulsions and learned coping mechanisms because the new goal was not that the finish line was here, it was anywhere. I was the girl who could do anything. And so that brings us all the way to the future when John Green texts and says, "Wanna race?" The answer was always going to be yes, because the story was always going to be once upon a time, there was a girl who could do anything. And by that point, I had already done so many things, traveled the world, written books, and I had seen that even when I was afraid, I could set a new goal and do things in a way that felt good and safe and exciting to me. And that means that I've lived a life that I love instead of a life with any regrets. So if I leave you guys a bunch of obviously talented and specific and unique clever storytellers with any lesson, I hope it's not anything I said this time about writing instructions or advice, but instead this idea that you can choose for yourself the story that you're telling about yourself, and you can do it right now. I changed everything about myself when I was 16, and guess what? My entire family and friends, they didn't say, what a weird thing that, Maggie suddenly is able to go outside during thunderstorms. Were you faking it before? People will follow you if you tell the story in a way that they can understand. That's what storytelling is all about. Now, first of all, thank you guys for having me. Thank you, Gail, for bringing me here. We have time for some questions, yes? And you have questions, no, microphones, yes, you have questions set up. You have microphones set up, so if you have any questions, this is the part where you can ask them. Or if you're all questioned out, we can just all lay down on the floor and think about ourselves for a while. Yes. louder, I think, is what it's a Stone Age microphone.
I don't know.
I can hear you.
So do you tell stories differently, or perhaps walk your way to tell a story in a certain way based on how you...
I love this question so much. It is like I planted you in the audience myself. So when I first got published, it was 2 small novels called Lament and Ballad. And as you probably could tell from my background, I grew up surrounded by Celtic mythology and Celtic music, Celtic myth. And these 2 novels were about Celtic fairies wreaking havoc on Virginian teens' lives, basically. And it included all the things that I loved about fairy mythology. Not Tinkerbell fairies, but the old fairy legends, the ones where fairies were more like ghosts or devils. They were terrifying back then. And so I brought all of these things and I told these stories for me. I didn't know any better. I just wrote these stories for me. And I mean, they're fine. They got published, obviously, and many people do love them. But they're not as popular as my other books. And the reason why is that I went on, and for the next one, for Shiver, which is about werewolves, I asked myself, is there a way that I can translate mythology better for people who have never read mythology? People who don't like fantasy, people who would prefer to just read things that are nonfiction. Can I write a story for them? Can I write it on multiple levels where it works as just a once upon a time, a boy met a girl, and then on other levels, it's doing the things that I want? So every single decision I made in Shiver was simplifying, trying to translate it, imagining that instead of my audience being me, my audience was instead my hairdresser. And I was in a very rural part of Virginia at the time, and so I highly doubt that Joe reads the kind of fiction that I write now. However, I was imagining if I could get him to pick it up and recommend it, what is the book? What's that going to look like? And so I gave that a shot. Then I felt prepared by the time I got to the Scorpio Races, which was 5 years into my career. I thought, I'm going to write this book just for myself again because I know it's got more mythology in it, but I'm going to try and use what I learned. Now, the Scorpio Races, some of you guys have read it. Scorpio Races is still my favorite of my novels, and it's a novel that is based on a Celtic myth that says that every November, horses come out of the ocean, gallop up and down the shore, and if you catch them, they make the best horses ever. And if they catch you, they drag you into the ocean, and later just your lungs and your liver wash up on the shore. I read this first as a child, and it was always my favorite. I was a horse person as a child. I mean, not like a centaur had horses. Actually, the first horse that I had, my parents said, you can have a horse, but you have to learn how to take care of it. You have to build the fence yourself, and you have to earn the money for both fence and horse yourself. So I basically tapped out on the fence because I was a child. And then by the time I got to the actual horse part, which I think this was the trick, I think the parents thought I would not be able to get a horse for the amount of money I had left over. The only horse I could afford was a fresh, off-the-track, retired thoroughbred racehorse named Bella. And she had spent the first 7 years of her life on the track, running as fast as she could to the left, and she seemed intent on spending the rest of her life doing that. And so my relationship with Bella was complex. Riding her was less an act of horsemanship and more about my relationship with God as you climbed onto her back and went through every single prayer you knew as she galloped you through neighbors' yards, under trees, into garages. So I knew that I loved her very dearly, but she was going to kill me before I hit puberty. And the Scorpio Race is basically about that. It's about the concept of horses being beautiful but dangerous. But I took everything that I learned about translating myth and used it to tell this deeply personal story, a very strange story. How are you going to recommend a novel to other people that's about horses eating people? They just climb quietly off the elevator as quickly as possible to get away from you is what happens when you describe the Scorpio Races. So how can you do this? So you have to take the myth and the metaphor, it turns out, and make it as universal as possible. In Shiver, it was about teens that turned into wolves as the temperature dropped. And the more years they turned into wolves, the less time they had as humans, the more times they had as wolves. Just wolves, not werewolves, until eventually they lost themselves. This metaphor, and that was my most commercially successful series, it sold millions and millions worldwide, and the reason why is because that metaphor can be retrofitted back into any kind of meaning. I got letters from people all over the world saying that they cried over that book because it made them think of losing a loved one to addiction, or how they got brain fog, or it just made sense for anything that had to do with loss. So I took a very complex story that to me was personal about giving away your identity, because I was inspired by visiting all of these massive super high schools and seeing folks that were so funky in middle school scrubbing off all of their interesting parts by the time they got to high school to just be Abercrombie and Finch bots. And that was what the story was about to me, but because I put that in metaphor, the magic became like a translator device, so that other people who didn't have that specific experience could still feel my sadness over loss and turn it into something bigger. So I took that, and when you take that into the Scorpio races, people can't understand why you would stick around horses if you don't like horses. But if you take those horses and make them beautiful and magical, mystical creatures that are fast and dangerous, and you turn what they are used for into a very cool race, you understand the culture of why these people would stick around these horses even though they're dangerous, that's just living with horses. So you've turned something real into something more accessible. So that's a way that I've learned that I'm telling the story that I want to tell, but I'm thinking about my audience. Yes, would it have been an easier, softer story to say, well, they're not actually man-eating horses. They're just magical horses because people love horses. Or unicorns, right? They're just fine. But that's not the story I wanted to tell. So I don't think of it as compromising myself. I think of it as being a better listener to my reader, basically. When I went to Hollywood, I discovered that they thought that they were doing the same process, but they would say instead, can we make them dogs? Because people love dogs. And they're like, no, that's not the point. It's a different story. Anyway, does that answer your question? Yes.
Yeah, okay, it works. I actually don't really like microphones. Sure, I'll use it. So, you talked about when you were young, you wanted to be a writer. What point did you realize that you really wanted to be a writer? And at what, did you want to be stuff when you were, younger than that? What was the other things that you wanted to be when you were growing up?
I also love this question. I'm a very curious person. One of my mission statements is not just that I'm the girl who can do anything. I'm the girl who I want to know everything. I want to try everything. So when I was a kid, there were many things that I wanted to be in addition to being a writer. I wanted to be a rose hybridizer. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. Whoa, my eyes got too bad when I was a teenager, and I still have the calendar where I wrote the Great Annapolis Letdown because I became too blind to be able to fly things at supersonic speeds. The world probably thanks me. I had all of these things that I wanted to do in addition to being a writer. And as a matter of fact, I actually always suspected that I would have to be something and a writer. I remember that when I was very tiny, I was typing away a novel on my dad's word processor, which tells you how old the story is. A word processor is a compact computer the size of this podium. I was typing away at it. I still remember what it was about. I was typing away at it. We'll save that for a second. Father came over and he said, so Maggie, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I looked up at him and I said, oh, I want to be a writer. I was not a cute child. I was very scrawny. I was very unfriendly. I didn't like hugs. When people tried to hug me, I would either turn into all bones or I would just kind of vanish like a Dementor into a black, noxious cloud. I was not a cute child. Used to wear black all the time, and when people asked me why I was wearing black, I would say things like, I'm mourning the death of modern society. I was a hit at parties. Anyway, so I was working on this novel, and he said, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said I wanted to be a writer, and he said, oh, you want to be poor. Now, in his defense, as I said, I remember the novel I was working on. It was about two dogs test driving a car. They were Scottish Terriers. It was a Porsche 911. No, Porsche 924. And the first line of dialogue was, it hugs the road. So maybe not the stuff of bestseller. He had a point. But I remember it was actually very grounding because it made me think, oh, so you can be a writer, but also you can't make a living at it. These two truths can be true at the same time. And so I always thought I had to be a writer and something else, which actually is a great thing to have in mind because even if I could make a living entirely from writing, I would always want to be living a life as well because I write about what I'm living. Maybe not directly, but in metaphor, things like that. But yeah, I was always very small, and you asked when I knew that it was for real. And I still remember that I had this amorphous idea of being a novelist when I was small. And then I was 11, yes. I was reading Diana Wynne Jones' Dog's Body. She wrote Howl's Moving Castle. You guys might have seen the movie. Book is good, movie is good, they're very different. I was reading it, and in the front of the book, it said, books also by Diana Wynne Jones. And just like that, it hit me like a lightning bolt. She has to do this as a job. Look at all of these books. This is a job. Someone has this job. I want that job. And I knew also, very shortly after that, that I didn't just want to have a job as a writer. I wanted to be a very specific type of writer. Namely, I wanted to be the kind of writer that when you're walking through the airport, you could see the titles in one font, and then huge were the author's name, Maggie Stiefvater. I really should have had a shorter last name. I should have gone with my maiden name. Maggie Stiefvater, maybe on 3 lines, Maggie Stiefvater. Anyway, so I knew I wanted to write commercial fiction, and the thing about commercial fiction is that it's not the best kind of fiction, but it is the most accessible kind of fiction. It's designed to be the sort of thing that most people can pick up and get something out of, which is a totally different skill than writing something which is the best written or the deepest dive into a subject. So knowing that I wanted to be a commercial writer was a huge heads up because I knew from when I was small that a valuable part of my schooling was going to be learning what people reacted to, which if you're writing in a vacuum, is not true. So I still have 2 critique partners that read everything I write before I have it go on to my editor. And I said this in the library, and I'm going to say it again. I have a group online. If you can't find it, ping me. It's a critique group, and it is people who are finding critique partners in the exact same way that I found critique partners. Back when I just had an artist blog, I had a couple of books out. I asked folks if they would do a dating service because I'd tried many different writing groups, and they were fine. I liked getting the feedback, but it always felt like the feedback I was getting, the edits were chores in some way. They were always not quite right. They were just tasks to be done. That's right, because I had just published my first book, and my editor gave me my edit letter, and it was 6 pages long, and I loved it. It was like my brain, if I still had objectivity, if I hadn't been working on this novel. And I thought, aha, 2 options here. 1, this editor is a unicorn. 2, there is actually another good reader out there for me. And so I realized that what I needed to do is I needed to look for people that loved to read the kind of books I was trying to write. That was the problem with the writing group. You guys actually already talked a little bit about that in the library, where you were talking about the different genres that you guys were coming up against. The perfect reader for you, I mean, you can get value from anyone, but if you're writing a super sci-fi genre, for instance, Grayson, the best reader for it is not going to be someone that loves reading literary fantasy because they're going to ask you to write a book which is not the book you intend. A good critique partner will still try and ask you what you intend anyway, but the best critique partner is someone who is kind of on the same wavelength as you. So I said, all right, here's the deal, folks. I will, you can post a comment in the blog saying what your favorite genre is, the last 2 books that you loved and read, the book you think that epitomizes you as a writer, and a description of your book. And if we look like a good match, we'll swap 50 pages, we'll critique it, and if at any point we don't like the experience for any reason, we're allowed to walk away. No explanation required. That is the rule of the game. Most important rule is that you be able to just be completely, you can ghost. So I went through about 15 people or so, and I found my 2 critique partners who were great, and I still have. However, so many people asked me if I could set up this system with more visibility that years ago I set up a forum. It's still going today. Hundreds of people there who follow the exact same rules. The only unifying thing is that they all came there through me, so they're all vaguely Stiefvater in their interests. They tend to be more speculative fiction. And what's amazing about it is that because the system works, find a reader who wants to read what you want to write, they've now started coming through my line. At first, they would say, I met my best friend at your critique group, or they would say, my best friend just got agented, or now there's actually folks that are bringing their published novels through the line and their critique partners there. It's It's great. I highly recommend you guys have a great system here, but also, as you get more specific and mature in your writing, there's teen writers out there as well that find people who are writing specifically the kind of books that you want and form your core group around you. Did I answer that question? I feel like I wandered far, far away. Thank you.
I know you're so excited.
Oh, thanks, Miss Guillen. So, when your grandma or whoever asks, when your grandma says, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you tell her and she says, what's your plan B? What is your response?
Flying fighter pilots! No, that's a different hobby altogether. Planes. Fly planes, not pilots. Anyway, yeah, so for me, I knew that the most important thing was when I got out of college, I rolled right into a technical editing job. And I thought that it would satisfy me because it's kind of matchy-matchy, right? Like it's writing. And it turned out that it was nothing like what I wanted to do. It was a desk job. In my spare time, I would spend probably 5 hours a week editing documents that were top secret on submarines. And then I would spend the rest of the time just stocking the fridge with snacks for the other federal contractors that I worked with. And I was bored out of my mind. And as I told the folks in the library, I realized a year into this job, I was sitting around, I was looking at a raise, and I had comfortable benefits, and I always knew that my rent was going to get paid. And I thought, there is a version of me that could do this for the rest of my life. I will continue to move up through these ranks and make money for the federal contractors, always know where my paycheck is coming, and this will be my life. And I was so terrified that I got up from my desk and I walked down the hall and I told my boss, this is my 2 weeks notice. And he said, Maggie, did we do something? And I said, no, I just have to go. I have to get out of here. And he said, well, you can have your job back at any time if you want it. What are you going to do? And I said, I think I'm going to be a portrait artist. And he said, Maggie, you were a history major. I was like, yeah, but if I spend 40 hours a week doing anything, I'm sure I'll get good at it. And my real goal was, I was making a certain amount of money as a federal contractor. And the goal was, in the next year, could I make my art make the same amount of money? And if not, I would go begging back from my job. And for me, it turned out that when that becomes the goal, X amount of dollars, and the only way you have to make it is with your art, any kind of art. You already heard what I do for a living, right? Whatever that is, make that amount of money. And then it turns out Grandma is always worried. You can be whatever. Grandma is always worried. You can come over and say, my father-in-law, bless his heart, not much of a reader. You can say, yeah, I hit #1 on the New York New York bestseller list. And he goes, yes. Are you ever going to be on People magazine? No, probably not. They always say, when do you get paid for that? Does that make a lot of money? The only thing that they have ever actually translated, because writer is strange, people all either assume that you make way more money or way less money than you do, is that I do have a book coming out from Disney next year. It is the sequel to the movie Brave. Disney asked me to write it, and I had a great time writing it. As you can tell, it's very Scottish. It's got bagpipers in it. And when I told my father-in-law that, he was like, Disney, you finally made it! I'm like, yes, I finally made it, Disney, what I've been waiting for. So the thing is that you've got to learn to shut off Grandma, except for, I take that back. You have to learn that you can't ever comfort someone else's ability to handle risk, and a creative lifestyle is a risk. You can only listen to Grandma, take on board what you think is correct of hers, and learn to slough off the rest, and then tell her, I've got a plan. And if you think Grandma can take it, you can give her the plan. But except that many people aren't going to love the risk of a creative lifestyle. I mean, I pay for my insurance out of pocket. This is a terrifying thing. I get paid twice a year. It's always a surprise how much you get paid, by the way. You get your royalty statement, and it tells you how well your books went, not the last 6 months, but the 6 months before that. So you have to go and say, All right, in 2020, do I think people purchased my hardcover sufficient enough for me to get royalties? And then it's like a surprise number, which is either happy face or sad face. And then you kind of weep or celebrate for the next 6 months as you try and decide what the next one will be. So this kind of lifestyle isn't for everyone. And even if it is for you, you cannot ask your family and friends to hold your dreams for you. And I guess that's actually a great way to close this, which is that when I was in college, I knew that I wanted to make my living, again, as a writer or a musician or an artist. And you guys already heard that I was a history major. So I went to the University of Mary Washington as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 16-year-old. I went there and I first dropped off my art portfolio, my art portfolio at the art department, and it took them a while to look at it, and when they did, they came back and said, sorry, your portfolio is not sophisticated enough to be an art major, or in fact, even to take any classes as a non-major. So, all right, whatever. So on I went to the music department, and I auditioned there. I wasn't a very good pianist because I played lots of other instruments, but none of them are ones that were normally taught at music departments. And so I was fine, but they said, yeah, your piano playing is fine, but not enough to be a major or even to take classes as a non-major. Fine, whatever. So finally, I'd saved the best and brightest for last. By the time I hit college, I had written over 30 novels, so I picked the best of them. And off I went, and I left that with the English department. And waited. So they never got back to me. I had to go and harass them. And I said, did you read it? And they said, yeah, we read it. Have you thought about being a business major? And that is the story of how I became a history major. And I love this story because it's such an important lesson for creatives. The only person you can trust to curate your dreams is you. The only person who is allowed to shut them down, and you are allowed to shut them down, that is the other thing. If you don't want to be a professional fill-in-the-blank creative, that is not a failure on your behalf, because as I just said, the creative lifestyle is a risky one, and that doesn't mean that you failed as a creator or a human if you decide you don't want to surf the wave. However, no one else can tell you no except for you. If at any point I'd walked in and heard those no's as no's, I wouldn't be standing here on the stage telling you I'm the girl who got to do anything, who lives the life that I want to live, because it wasn't personal. They see hundreds and hundreds of students that come through there, and they're just trying to guess the ones that will make it through the program in a way that's going to actually accomplish something. And that is a very difficult thing to accomplish by just judging someone in 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a novel, whatever, because I wrote genre fiction, not literary. I'm sure my prose was terrible. I'm sure my art portfolio was also terrible. And I'm also 100% sure that I still cannot read music very well. So no, I wasn't a great bet on paper or in front of them to be someone who was successful in that major. But it wasn't their job to curate my dreams. It was my job to do that. And so don't take no's from anyone. You have to have the long game for it, which is my long way of saying grandma can't curate your dreams. You have to. But you can still respect grandma's no and say, no, I'm sure you won't have to pay my rent. Anyway, thank you guys for having me.
I'll just come up there. I just need to tell them what to do. Hi, I'm all interested. Oh, is it good? Oh, hi. We're so happy that you were here. I don't know where the rest of the people who bought tickets were, but they were free, so maybe that was... Anyway, this was lovely. We're going to move the table. So if you have some books that you wanted her to sign, or if you wanted to run down to the cafeteria...
Preferably mine.
Preferably hers. She wants to sign the books that she wrote, not somebody else's. That would be weird. That would be weird. So if you give us a second to move the table over here, we can kind of line up and come through this way. As a reminder, if you're here, as you know, there are probably still 1,000 books down in the cafeteria for sale and some baked goods. As much as you'd probably love to just go home after this, we do need help cleaning up. Please don't just run away. Hands again for Maggie Stiefvater. Thank you, everybody.